All right, so everyone finished? All right. Well, good evening, everyone. Like I said, Pastor's out tonight, so he called me up. He asked me about 24 hours ago. He said, Nate, he's like, I'm not feeling very well because my tooth broke, and he's like, we'll see how it goes. So I think it was around 3-4 o'clock this afternoon, just as I was finishing up school. He's like, Nate, I need you to preach. So you guys are stuck with me this evening. So one of the things, especially when you're under the gun, I'll be the first one to say, like, I don't do this every day. I teach every day. I do that. So in that respect, it is something that I do. But as far as, preparing sermons, that sort of thing, that's something I don't do as frequently. And so typically I'm used to having a lot of time to do it. So if I rush through tonight, apologize. A lot of times, you can ask my wife, one of the things I always do is I always go in the closet and I preach at the wall. I don't know why. I just do that. That's one of the things that I do as a practice. It works for me. It's something that I'm used to. I've done it for years. I'll tell you what, there's been a lot of sermons against the wall in my closet, but it's just one of the things that I do. One of the things that I know sometimes happens when you do that, I don't know if you've ever spoken yourself into a corner and then you just have to stop and you reset and you're like, okay, I don't know what happened. All right. Well, I do that kind of thing sometimes. So what I want to look at this evening is compassionate Christianity. Compassionate Christianity. And before I get started with that, one of the things that, part of the reason that I'm doing this evening is compassion is one of those things that I struggle with sometimes. I'm a firm believer in looking at things that you struggle with, because the only way you get better at them is to look at them. And one of the reasons that I struggle with compassion is because I'm a teacher. And when you're a teacher, one of the things that's hard is, and I think I was talking to a few of you last week when I was requesting prayer. I had a kid who picked up a table and threw a table the other day. And, that's not one of those things that happens every day. That was a new one for me, okay? But it happens, okay? There's things like that. And when they happen, one of the hardest things, or I think one of the hardest things as a teacher to kind of deal with, is to let that go. It happens today. Tomorrow you got to walk back in there. Maybe they're there. Maybe they get suspended for a day or two or whatever. But guess what? They're going to come back to you, okay? And so when they come back to you, the question is how do you reestablish that relationship? Obviously there was something about the relationship before. In the case of my table, it had nothing to do with me, which was great. So I didn't really have that issue. But I do feel that is something that's very common when it comes to life just in general. For me as a teacher, that's something I deal with. I think for us as Christians, I think it's something that we deal with as well as far as compassion is concerned. I think a lot of us will drive down the road, we'll see someone maybe on a corner, and we'll just say they're peddling for money. They just want money. We make that judgment right quick. We don't know if there's something that's difficult going on. There could be something going difficult in their life. There might be something that maybe we can't deal with, but the reality is we deal with a lot of those types of things on a daily basis. And so for me, that's been one of the things that I've been kind of challenged on. Another thing that I've been challenged with, and again, being a teacher, one of the things that a lot of the kids, and let's be frank, a lot of the adults, they like to watch YouTube. All right. I call it YouTube University. As a teacher, a lot of times we can kind of learn things on there and you use it. If you're someone who works on cars, stuff like that, especially if you're not something that you do every day, all right, you might go onto YouTube, try to find out how to do something, okay? And that's very common. But one of the channels, I guess you would say, when it comes to YouTube that I actually enjoyed watching quite a bit was Caught in Providence. How many of you are familiar with Caught in Providence? Anybody? Okay. All right. So Caught in Providence, there's a judge, and you've probably seen it before, but Providence, Rhode Island, and what the judge does is, or what I should say did, because he just passed away a couple weeks ago. All right. But one of the things that he did is when people came to his courtroom, he tried to remember compassion. And one of the ways that he had this thing called the Alameda Fund. Okay. And the Alameda Fund was named after his mom. And the idea with the Alameda Fund was to basically use money that people would donate to basically pay people's fines. All right. So, when you're in a big city like that, one of the things that you got to deal with is parking tickets and that sort of thing. And that was kind of the court that he dealt in. But one of the things I always found interesting about him as a judge, and especially in today's society, we don't necessarily always think about that, is the compassion he had being a judge. And I think as Christians, a lot of times we lack compassion. I know me as a teacher, I lack compassion. All right. And again, it's just one of those things. So because I think that kind of keeps coming up, I also think about families. All right. Families have a lot of issues. I don't know every kid here at church as far as what their family life is like. I know a lot of times we put on our nice Sunday best, we come to church, we make it look like everything's fine. But, even though my parents are here in the front, I can't tell you the number of times we get in the car, we get in a fight, and then we put, everything's great today, but it's really not, okay? And I'm sure every single person in this room can relate to that story, okay? So I'm not telling on my mom and dad or anything like that, but those are real stories. And so for us, when I have students that come into my classroom, guess what? I don't know every single story. I don't know every little thing that happens outside of there. I've had students that have ankle bracelets on. I don't know what the issue is. I don't know what's going on. I just know that part of my job is to help teach them, okay? And so, for us as Christians, these are some of the things that you have to kind of deal with. So, first thing I wanted to look at before I even looked at any verses was compassion just in general terms. So, I did kind of a Pastor Todd thing because I think the last time he preached, he did this, but he looked it up in the Merriam-Webster dictionary. And it says, compassion is defined as the sympathetic consciousness of others' distress together with a desire to alleviate it. When it comes to compassion, the idea is to try to help someone else, okay? And it's not just one of those things like you just say something just to kind of make them feel better, but it's also trying to help them in some way to kind of alleviate whatever that issue is. And a lot of times I think what we do as Christians, again, before we even look at any text, is we say, something nice to try to make it go, kind of make it sound like we're being godly or spiritual or however you want to say it. But the reality is it's just one of those things that we can say so we can kind of keep walking and feel good about ourselves. It's not a real thing that we're really trying to do. And so, for me, that's one of the things I'm challenged with. I'm challenged with the fact that, for me in my everyday life, whether it be at school, whether it be, at the store, whether it be dealing with maybe one of my brothers and sisters because I have 400 of them. Whatever the case may be, sorry, mom and dad, I do have 11 siblings. I'm the oldest, okay? But when it comes to that, it's one of those things that we have to remember that, okay? We have to remember the compassion part, okay? And so the first thing I want to do is look at just a couple of quick passages in the Old Testament kind of dealing with compassion. The first one I want to look at is Exodus 34. Exodus 34. If you want to turn there, Exodus 34, and we're going to start in verse 6. So this is going back to the story of Moses, all right, in Mount Sinai. And as we go over to verse 6, it says, and the Lord passed before him and proclaimed, the Lord God, merciful and gracious, long-suffering, abundant in goodness and truth, keeping mercy for thousands, giving iniquity and transgression and sin, that will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children and upon the children's children and the third and to the fourth generation. And Moses made haste and bowed his head toward the earth and worshiped. When it came to God, when it came to Egypt, they're in captivity. Moses leads them out, okay? And as we know, when he's up on Mount Sinai, what do the Israelites do? What do they do? What do they do? Yeah, they worship the golden calf, okay? Was that a good thing? Obviously not, okay? You would think because they get taken out of, led out of Egypt that they'd be like, hey, hooray, great, everything's fine, but it's not. And they immediately kind of turn and go to something else. And so, if you look at the compassion that God had on his people, he did judge them, all right? He did have judgment if you know anything about the story. But in addition to that, the people that were willing to turn from that, he had compassion on them. And that's one of the things that's always hard. I think that's hard for all of us. If we have something that's done wrong to us, what's the first reaction that we want to do? We want to do it back to them. And so I think the compassion aspect is something that's important. If you turn over to Psalm 103:13, this is kind of a simple one. I'm almost there. 103:13. And it says, like as a father pitieth his children, so the Lord pitieth them that fear him. We should fear the Lord. But one of the things when we pitieth, we have compassion, okay? That compassion that he has on us as his children. All right, and Lamentations, and you don't have to turn there, but Lamentations 3:22 through 23, it says, it is of the Lord's mercies that we are not consumed, because his compassions fail not. They are new every morning. Great is his faithfulness. You know, if you think about compassion is something that it renews every day. So for us, you know, me as a teacher, kind of going back to that as an example, all right, the compassion that I have to have on my students needs to renew every day. All right, is that easy? No, it's not easy. Okay, I'll be the first one to say that. Those of you that are educators or have done some of those kinds of things, that's very difficult. If you're someone who's you work in customer service, I don't know, having my own business in a previous life, one of the things that you kind of have to deal with is difficult customers. And when you see that customers, I'm a firm believer in sometimes firing a customer. I do believe in that. But as a general rule, you have to deal with them. And it's very hard sometimes, especially if you have someone that you've had problems with over and over again, to kind of have that compassion for them. And so for us as Christians, we need to make sure that we have that compassion over and over and over again, just like God does for all of us. You know, one of the things that he does for us is he died for our sins. And, you know, we have to ask him to come into our heart. But even then, do we sin again? The answer is yes, we do sin. We sin all the time, and we're required to go back to them. And man, I'll be honest, if I think about myself, if I was God, and I'm not trying to be sacrilegious or anything, but, you know, just thinking in a logical sense, if I was God, would I want to forgive myself every time? Probably not. At some point, I'm going to sit there and look at myself and say, you're not sorry, okay? You know, just like sometimes, honestly, when I look at people that wrong us or do wrong to us, we say, you're not sorry. And, you know, when we look at one of the things that, as I was kind of thinking about this, I was thinking about kind of simple things. And when it comes to my Sunday school class, I have a Sunday school class here. It's kind of turned almost into it pretty much is young marrieds. Let's be honest, it kind of is. But one of the things I'm a firm believer in is being real. Okay, and when I say being real, things that we deal with on an everyday basis. Okay, so for those of us who drive a car, we've probably all had that experience where someone's driven around us going, you know, 500 miles an hour, and we're like, that guy's being an idiot or something like that, you know. And when we say that, who knows? Maybe that person, that something happened with their family, they're trying to get to the hospital right away. Maybe it's something like that. And as much as we want to cast judgment on the fact that they're speeding and doing that, maybe what we need to do is have the compassion to say, man, that guy obviously needs to get somewhere, you know? So it's one of those things where we got to kind of turn the tide of what we think about. And that's the reality of our Christian walk. Our Christian walk sometimes is the fact that we got to have a countenance change. We got to kind of change kind of our thinking, be more Christ-like when it comes to that. So as we go through our life, we can do a better job for him. All right, so when it comes to our Christianity, that's something that we got to look at. In the New Testament, turn over to Matthew 9. Matthew 9. Matthew 9:36. And I think I must have the wrong. See, there's probably my first. Oh, no, there it is. There it is. I found it. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. It says, but when he saw the multitudes, he was moved with compassion on them, because they fainted and were scattered abroad as sheep having no shepherd. Then saith he unto his disciples, The harvest truly is plenteous, but the laborers are few. Pray ye therefore the Lord of the harvest that he will send forth laborers into his harvest. If we're going to have laborers into his harvest, what do we have to have on people? Compassion. You know, that's one of the easiest, it's one of the easiest things to say. In my eyes, it's probably one of the hardest things to actually carry out. And, you know, here we have it in scripture, it's something that we're supposed to do. So if it's there for us to do, then we should do it. But what do we do with our lives? A lot of times we go against that. We try to fight it. And the reason we fight it is because we have this human nature that's mean, terrible sometimes, and we just struggle with it. And so, you know, that's part of the reason why I think it's good for us to be reminded of it. We can just turn over a couple pages to Matthew 14. So Matthew 14:14, and Jesus went forth and saw a great multitude, and he was moved with compassion toward them, and he healed their sick. Now, I don't know about you, but sometimes we run into people that are sick. We run into people that have needs. And the question is are you willing to help fill that need? All right. There's a movie, I think it's Disney. I'm pretty sure it is. Robots. And one of the things that he says in there is see a need, fill a need. See a need, fill a need. And I always kind of like that line because a lot of times we'll see a need and we don't fill it. And I'm not saying that just because you see it means that you have to be the one to fill it, but sometimes you are. Sometimes you're the one that needs to step up to the plate and take care of that. That's one of the things, even in a school setting, you know, when you're a teacher, there's a lot of different things going on. You know, there's always a need for something. And the question is when do you step in? When do you let someone else do the job? You know, it's always that kind of give and take when it comes to things. And so you do when it comes to, you know, your students here at school or here at church. You know, you have a Sunday school class. What needs do your kids have? Some of the kids that come to Sunday school might not be someone who's here at the church, so we don't necessarily know everything that's going on with them. So what needs need to be filled? What needs do they have that maybe you can help with? So these are some of the things that we kind of deal with, and we don't maybe always think about them. All right, then let's turn over to Mark 6:34. So Mark 6:34, it says, and Jesus, when he came out, saw much people and was moved with compassion towards them because they were his sheep, not having a shepherd, and began to teach them many things. So again, you know, this is basically the right before the feeding of the 5,000, but sees all these people and he's moved with compassion against them. Again, for us, another example of how we're supposed to look at things with compassion. Move over to Luke 7. So Matthew, Mark, Luke, we're kind of going in order here, which is probably nice. So if we look at starting in verse 11, it says, and it came to pass the day after that he went into the city and called Nain, and many of his disciples went with him, and much people. Now when he came nigh to the gate of the city, behold, there was a dead man carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow, and much people of the city were with her. And when the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her, and said unto her, weep not. And he came and touched the bier, and they that bare him stood still, and he said, young man, I say unto thee, arise. And he that was dead sat up and began to speak, and he delivered him to his mother. You know, he could have easily walked by, couldn't he have? You know, how many people do we walk by on a daily basis that we don't have compassion on, that we don't think twice about? There's a lot of people that are kind of silent to us. We don't really say anything to them. And so, again, when I think about compassion in our Christian life, these are a lot of the things that, again, I struggle with. There's people that, as many of you know, we had a neighbor who was in a tragic car accident, and he wasn't drinking, anything like that, and it's all public, so it's not one of those things that's a quiet thing, but he ended up having to go to prison. And as of right now, he's in prison for a minimum of 2 years, maximum of 5 years. And his every single day, my wife and I have to look at his wife at their house right across the street from us. And we know where they are, and we have them on our prayer list and all those kinds of things. But sometimes you have to do something. And one of the things that we've done, at least to this point, is his wife's had a hard time working with the lawn. And that's one of the things that she struggled with. And so I don't know how many times I've mowed their lawn, but it's been a bunch. My neighbors, a couple of them have also stepped in and helped mow the lawn as well. But it's one of those things where, that's one where I was moved with compassion. I was moved with compassion because I knew this was something that I could do to try to help them. And that's it. But that's really all it takes. It takes a little bit of your time. Sometimes it takes a little bit of your resources, whatever that is. And that's all it takes. And a lot of times, what do? We turn our head, look the other way, and hope someone else takes care of it. I think that's one of the travesties sometimes of us as Christians, because we look at our lives and we say, hey, you know what? I'm a good Christian. I'm so sorry. I hope things get better. But then, you know what? You never do anything to try to make any of those things better. Maybe there's just a simple note you could give them just to encourage them. I know Pastor talks a lot about that when it comes to some of our shut-in people, send them a note. I'm not good at that. I'll be the first one to say I'm terrible at it. You can ask my wife. I'm terrible at writing anything to her too. All right. But it's one of those things that just because I'm terrible at it doesn't mean that I shouldn't do it either. Right. All right. I think all of us can kind of agree on that. And so when we look at those things, those are some of the things to consider. So a few other things here. Ephesians 4:30 through 32, it says, and grieve not the Holy Spirit of God, whereby ye are sealed in the day of redemption. Let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and evil speaking be put away with you with all malice. And be ye kind to one another, tenderhearted, forgiving one another, even as God, for Christ's sake, hath forgiven you. There's a lot of people out there that aren't Christians. And what do? They look at the people that supposedly are Christians. That's the way they're going to say it. Supposedly you're a Christian, but you don't do anything to make anything better for me. Okay? You're not someone who's having compassion on me, And, that's one of those things that's kind of striking, or I hope it strikes you. Again, I know for me, anytime you're kind of dealing with kids that are disrespectful at times, that say nasty things to you, sometimes they're really not saying it at you. It's about something else that's going on in their life. And as much as it's as easy for me to just kind of accept that and say, hey, they're doing that to me, so how dare them? And, I can get angry and everything else. It's a lot easier to say, that's not really directed at me. That's really directed at somebody else. How can I help you? And when you do that, you kind of turn the tide of the conversation. Not always. I'm not going to sit here and say it's perfect, but I will say more times than not, it does turn the conversation. And so, and believe me, I don't want this to turn into a professional development or anything like that, because I have to go through those at school and things. But I do think there's a lot of truth to that when it comes to us with how we deal with other people. And whether it's our neighbors, whether it's people at church, there's all kinds of different applications for it. Your imagination probably has a whole lot more things than even what mine does. In 1 Peter 3:8 says, finally be of one mind, having compassion one of another, love as brethren, be pitiful, be courteous. Being courteous to other people. One of the things I like to show at school, I don't know if any of you have ever seen Steve Hartman on the road. Anybody in here? Okay, so if you ever see any of the Steve Hartman on the road segments on CBS, he has a thing they kind of put this thing together for teachers. So it's basically we call it social emotional learning, okay? But one of the things that I like to do with those is I like to show them to my class. Doesn't have to be anything big. It's like 3 to 5 minutes. That's all it is, beginning of class. We call it Friendly Fridays at school, okay? So on Fridays, Friendly Fridays, every single class period I have, I try to do one of those. And part of the reason I like to do those is because it's a segment that has nothing to do about them. It's not one of those things where, you're filling out something. It's something where you're just kind of recognizing that there's someone else in the world that, realized that maybe in their own life, maybe they had to do something for others. One of the ones that kind of pops into my head right now is there was a guy in, I believe it was Minnesota. It was either Minnesota or Wisconsin. It doesn't really matter. But his wife died. And so what he did was he bought a bench at the local park. And he commemorated the bench to his wife. Okay, and so a good thing, right? Well, in the middle of wintertime at the park, how many people are going to the park in the wintertime? Not very many, right? A lot of snow. But this gentleman every single week would go and sit at that park bench. And so a couple of the guys at the that were Public Works, I guess, that were responsible for snow removal. You know what they did? They realized that he was doing it, and so every week, whenever it would snow, they would plow that portion of the sidewalk for him. And he realized one day, he's like, someone's doing this for me. And sure enough, they interviewed these people, and he found out that they were doing that for him. And it meant so much to him. Did it really take that much for them to do that? Not really. Did it mean the world to that man? The answer is yes. And so that's part of the reason why when it comes to my students and when it comes to my classes, it's one of the reasons that I like to show some of those segments, because to me, learning about that through, something that's a good, wholesome video like that, and sometimes it resonates more with you than anybody else. And so, for me, when I kind of look at things in Scripture, again, just like a Sunday school class, it's one of the things I always like to do is I like to look at where the rubber meets the road. I always kind of say that, because many times we talk at a high level, but we kind of forget where we're walking to, and it's really easy to do that sometimes because we get super spiritual. We sit there and we look at it and we say, I know what all the right answers to this are, so I'm going to sit here and mark the checkbox that I was here at church. But the reality is are you taking what's here at church and are you applying it to somewhere else? Because most of us, I think sometimes we do just sit there and then we walk away and say, I feel a little bit better about myself, but it really doesn't go anywhere else. If you think about someone driving a car, you can go learn how to drive a car. Me being a pilot, I can go learn how to be a pilot, okay? But if all I do is sit in a classroom and just read about being a pilot, learn all this stuff, but never actually go into the airplane or get in the car and drive with Mr. Wedlake or something like that, all right, guess what? If I never do any of that, I'm never actually going to be able to be a driver. I'm never actually going to be able to be a pilot. And so, you have to kind of understand that as far as what Scripture's telling us, because for us, what we have to do is we have to take it, we have to apply it, we have to use it out in the world. And if we don't use it out in the world, then what is it really profiting us? It's really not doing much for us, and it's not doing much for anybody else. And so for me, what themes can we draw from Scripture on compassion here? Well, the first thing that I think about is God's nature, all right? Compassion reveals God's character. Think about that for a second. Compassion reveals God's character. The second one, love with action, all right? We have to love with action. True compassion leads to action, not feelings, okay? So true compassion leads to action, not just feelings. Yeah, I can sort of feel compassion for you. I hope that doesn't happen to you again. Or, your tire broke, your tire popped. Hey, I really hope you get that tire changed. But did you stop by, maybe see if they need help? Maybe you didn't, okay? So you have to have that action associated with it. And then finally, just like it says in Lamentations there, we have to have a daily renewal of it. Every single day, we got to renew that compassion. We got to start it back up again. All right, we got to be reminded of that. God's mercies are new every morning, and that provides a model for constant renewal of our own empathy and kindness. So we have to kind of remember that, because in order for us to be kind, in order for us to have that compassion, we have to renew it every day, and God does that for us. Once we ask for that forgiveness, He's already passed it. We don't have to worry about it. He's not thinking about it anymore. And you know what? All of us, we need to do the same thing with all the people around us. And don't get me wrong, not easy. There's a lot of things in this life that we can talk about that seem real easy, but they're not. And for us, it's really easy to get angry about different things, but sometimes it takes just as much effort for us to think the best in the situation. How many times do we not give people the benefit of the doubt? A lot of times what we want to do is we want to assume the worst. And so, for us, I think the reminder here is to make sure that we're looking for that compassion, that we're trying to use that in our daily walk as a Christian, and that we're looking at the people around us compassionately, and we're applying it every day. Let's stand to our feet. Brother Ed Cowflesh, would you close us in prayer this evening?